Javi, how are you, my friend? You know, it's funny because we met, I don't know, 3 years ago or something like that. And I was just like, I love you, man. You're my tribe. You had my energy. We could talk about anything. I think like in our first conversation, we were talking about like emotional health, mental health,
Ooh.
like just and we didn't even know each other, but it's that connection that you make with certain people right away where you're just like, you know what, we'll talk. And we were both like tech guys, right? Like so it was really refreshing to be able to just talk about anything, and I really appreciate your friendship. Thank you for being on the show. I know you have, a few shows now and just are crushing it. How are you?
Dude, I'm doing great. What a way to start. Thank you for having me first and foremost. And oh my God, we could take this conversation so many ways after we've been both in tech. We talked about emotional health. I mean, I'm following your lead, but I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because like every conversation that I have, literally, there is a tone of mindfulness that that you can just feel from people, and I think probably one of the biggest catalysts for that was, what we've experienced here on planet Earth the last
Hmm.
4 years or so, and it just really like first of all, put I think a lot of people into a position where they had to sit with themselves,
Hmm.
right? Like
Hmm.
in the past, who sat with themselves and didn't leave a room or a house? I mean, if you were fortunate enough to have a house, maybe you had
Yep.
a little more latitude. But I know buddies who have mansions who are like, very wealthy people who were still kind of going nuts. They were like literally in their Beverly Hills mansions going crazy. And you would think to yourself, hold on a second, brother. You have a mansion in Beverly Hills. You got your, Bentleys and whatever, and you were still getting this cabin fever. And it's interesting because it was so sort of cerebral, that experience, but just having to sit with yourself, that only just happened if you were like intentionally doing that as a monk or something, you know what I mean?
Dude,
And
I gotta tell you, and I know this is not to get too deep into the deep stuff, right?
let's do it.
But I am a very outgoing, social. I need to be out there all the time kind of guy. And after the pandemic, like my life has changed to a way where like I spent a lot more time, and I found like some comfort in being, in my apartment, selling, working, creating, without having the need to like be outside. I crave
Mhm.
it, I miss it, but like silver lining from like what you're describing from the pandemic and all the things that I know it's a thing of the past for most people, but for me, it's changed a lot of me going forward, which
Mm.
is really cool.
Yeah. And I think that that's another sort of like resounding theme. It's just that
Mm-hmm.
now people are finding, and I suppose it could go the opposite way where they were what they saw inside was so traumatic that they didn't want to do that again. But that's where
Sure.
I think you grow, right? Like if you continue to dig into those aspects of yourself that are incredibly uncomfortable. I remember I was on the metro rail yesterday and I was heading to that happy hour tech meetup that I was mentioning to you earlier. And I remember there was like I was on LinkedIn and there was a I don't know, maybe a post or something that caused me to feel super insecure, or like these like insecurities popped up inside of me and I could feel it. It was like somewhere in my like stomach, chest area, whatever. And I forgot exactly what it was. And I just kept wanting to revisit or figure out what it was that was causing me that
Yeah.
discomfort, that emotional turmoil
Yep.
inside. And I still don't remember. So I sort of sat there, and this was all happening inside me, right?
Yeah.
Obviously. And I sat there and was just like, well, if it was that important, I would remember. Right.
Yeah.
So all
Exactly.
that mindfulness stuff, I think, is so important, especially in sales. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So if we think about how does this all apply to sales, you get incredibly insecure when things are not going your
Yep.
way.
Yep.
For most of us, we're on that high. We're
Mm-hmm.
getting that dopamine hit from like, crushing it and closing
Mm-hmm.
deals and, you know, oh, I'm a, soldier, right? Like I'm
Yep.
gonna get on the phone and go through this stuff. And then
Right.
when it's not, right, it can work the opposite way. And so like being able to actually have that internal dialogue, that mindfulness, uh, the maturity, the
Mm-hmm.
enlightenment to be able to go through those things, I think is really important, especially as a salesperson, right?
Yeah. I think, listen, man, you've hit a really interesting point, because what you've done is you put together, what happened through the pandemic, and then let's say the last 2 years in tech, 2022, right, and what we've covered for this year. It's been a lot harder to sell, right? So I think that when you think about performance and the things that you mentioned, a lot of folks have had to look internally, right, forcefully, and say like, what's not working, right? I'm coming from 2 years of a high, and now like I need to do something to be better, to transact in a more appropriate fashion, being human, but also like because sales is such has a reliance on your human feeling, on like if you don't trust yourself, what you're saying or how you're asking questions, people can perceive that. And so that has given a lot of salespeople the time. And I know of some friends that have gone into sales coaching to help others kind of like discover their strengths, but also get them out of what's called that sales slump.
Hmm.
Because if you stick in that slump where you don't sell, or you can't get back into your groove, you've lost your mojo, whatever you want to call it, it's tough to get out of there. And I think that self-reflection, understanding about what you are, where you're good at, or like doing even a reflection of what did I do right when I was crushing it? How can I bring that back?
Hmm.
Is not something that a lot of people can just simply turn on a switch and do. And I
Hmm.
think that that's been a common topic in the last year and a half with sales teams, that people have to start paying attention to that. And I don't think everyone has the right guide to say like, how do I get from where I am today to get back my confidence to continue to crush it and continue my path into whatever's next for me in sales?
And for the folks out there watching or listening to this episode, Javi's been at some of the most iconic tech companies ever, right? Zenefits in sales, leadership, WeWork, I mean, just like iconic companies that have gone through their ups and downs, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, you know, to be able to navigate that is so important. But isn't that life, brother? Isn't that life? Isn't that like in sales, it
Good
gives
point.
us this, right? It's this court or
Yep.
field or
Yep.
whatever, this contained environment to actually be able to practice and build these habits,
Yep.
skills,
Yep.
right? To be able to do, pay our bills and
Yeah.
do our job better. But I can't help but, as you articulate these things, think to myself, but that's life,
Mm-hmm.
right?
It's funny you say that, because you mentioned Zenefits and WeWork, which actually had a very similar story, right? So for those that don't know it, Zenefits was a tech darling, the fastest growing company in Silicon Valley, 2013, 2014, and then it stopped, right? So imagine having a team of people that are used to this adrenaline, to this success, to always being on the news, to having all your friends contact you to say like, oh my God, your company's doing great, to with a flip of a dime within a month being on the opposite end of that. Oh my God, you guys are all over the news. People are saying the worst things about you. Your CEO got fired. Like, what's going to happen? And you go from a sales environment where it's easy to sell, where you're almost taking orders, as some people like to call it, to a sales environment where now you have to reach out to people, and now you're handling every objection in the book. I see you on the news. I don't trust you guys. You guys have a party culture. Your CEO got fired. All your competitors are, kind of picking up what you guys have built on. And, you know, crazy to say that that's life, right? Because everyone that had sort of that environment in their head of like, this is going to continue to go this way, I'm going to continue to crush and continue to grow, suddenly hit a wall.
Mm.
And it was a really hard time. I stayed through the transition of when the company, in 2.5 years, went from $0 to $72 million in sales. And then, in a matter of time, that momentum just like disappeared.
Mm.
Right. And some reps couldn't do it. Some reps couldn't do it because it took you a different skill set to continue to progress or even hit quota. Like people were used to exceeding quota, going to an environment of like, now I need to do outbound I need to
Mhm.
call people, which is a different skill set, as you know.
Mhm.
Like, the rep that's taking orders, that receives a call, if somebody wants them to walk them through a demo, ask a couple questions, move on to the next step. Excuse me. That's a very different rep than the rep that has to start doing creative outreach and, get to people and find a problem that doesn't exist for someone that
Mhm.
may or may not have been looking, kind of for you. And the same thing happened at WeWork, man.
Yeah.
WeWork, same company, or different product, different time, 5 years ahead. In my career, you just had a company that was exploding, and everyone knew who it was. It had an incredible brand. Everything was great. It was not easy to sell in certain markets like Miami, which is where you and I live, because not everyone would come to Miami in 2018. But suddenly, we picked up all this momentum, and then we fail our IPO. We can't go public. Our numbers aren't good. CEO gets fired. And so it's like I see the same movie twice, and I see the same ending, and it's like, well, I know I got to brace because I know what's coming. But to your point, that mental resiliency in sales, I think it's
Mhm.
one of the biggest, kind of lessons from those two experiences.
Do you think that one of the big reasons that early stage sales teams right now are struggling is because of this stuff? Or is it some other, kind of variable? We all know that like companies are, for a variety of reasons, inflation and, the self-perpetuating, thing that has happened now with the, consolidation of tools and
Mm-hmm.
budgets
Mm-hmm.
being pulled back, certainly in SaaS, but we saw it in, across the market in general. We all understand those like market dynamics, but like I think it also like my opinion is that it feeds the negativity and the fear, feeds the problem actually, and
Yep.
makes it even worse. That maybe I'm just going to throw an arbitrary number out there. Maybe 5% would be buyers would be making different buying decisions because of the macro environment stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I actually think it quadruples
Mm-hmm.
because of the fear factor,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right? Like, right, you see this in society all the time. Oh, there's a God, a burglary in your neighborhood, and
Sure.
then everybody is now scared in the neighborhood,
Sure.
right? And they pull back and they change their behavior,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And there were no other burglaries. There was that one, but
Yep.
you see kind of like the mass effect psychologically that it's happening now, right?
Right.
Do
Right.
you think that that's what's affecting a lot of sales teams these days?
So I think there's really two things that I talk about on a regular basis, and when I say talk about, I'll plug myself in. But I'm a fractional chief revenue officer for B2B SaaS companies across the U.S. and Latin America. And what I've seen over the last couple of years, which is very different than what we've seen, in the time that you and I grew up through our sales careers in the 2010s through 2020, for example. Number one is macro,
Mm,
right? So I think that we haven't seen anything like this. I'll quote David Sachs, who sometimes talks about being in a software recession. And that meaning that companies or enterprises that are, kind of purchasing software are being very specific about what type of software they need. And so that's making the salesperson's job a lot harder, because you can't just show up and say like, look, this is a cool tool that's going to help you do X, Y, or Z.
mm,
It's like, cool, this tool is going to make you do X, Y, or Z, but how is that going to move the needle for making us more productive, reducing costs, increasing revenue? That type of sale, I think, is a little bit of a harder sell that asks the sales rep to elevate and to, not just come to the table and be able to do a demo like what we were talking about earlier. Giving a demo and asking the right questions is not enough,
mm,
right? It's more of like, how can I talk to you, ask questions that I uncover your real pain, but I can bring my business acumen to the table so I can really understand where you guys are and what you're trying to do, right? A public company is at the public eye, and everyone is looking at their margins and, their revenue growth, et cetera. And if you're not NVIDIA that's crushing their sales goals quarter over quarter, you're a company that needs to, cut here and there because the cost of borrowing is a lot higher. There's uncertainty. We don't know if there's a recession. Everyone talks about it, but we don't know if it's coming. So I think procurement teams are tightening up their budgets, and so that on the macro side is impacting, the sales environment, especially on the early sales side, the most. And then the second variable, which I think is also really important, is just the early stage sales team improvises a lot. And I like to use a quote that I say, like, don't improvise. That's for musicians, which I am, and the guitars aren't fake. The sales reps that miss the most are the ones that improvise because they're winging it constantly. And so one of the things that I do when I work with companies is, kind of try to put a structure based off the success that they've had and seen with existing clients or with, what the market is actually doing. So I help them think through, like, what is the actual need that this person might have? If, let's say, you're selling to a VP of sales right now, their top, priority is hitting quota. Teams across the board are hitting 35 to 39% of them are hitting quota, which is tough, right? So if you talk to VP of sales, you can't come to a conversation and say, like, hey, here's this really cool tool that's going to help you make life prettier or whatever it is. It's like, let me have a conversation with you. Let me address the elephant in the room. We're in a tough environment. People aren't buying as much. How are you doing? Like, help me understand. And this actually comes to the first part of our conversation, which is, tell me about you, man. Like, how are you doing? Like, what's top of mind? You're probably in the hot seat right now. And, that human element is one thing, but then, like, having a structure through which you navigate and try to create a business case around is ultimately what, a lot of early stage sales teams don't do. And it's because, they're improvising, but also, they're trying to figure it out as they go. And I think that's where, for example, again, I'm plugging myself in again, but that's where my opportunity lies to come and say, like, here's how you can structure this, and here's how you can come to a good place and have a consistent flow of, like, you have a sales team that has 5 people. In the early days, you take those 5 people and ask them to demo you or pitch you the product. They all have different stories and different conversations. And that lack of uniformity is usually hurting the teams in the early days. So that's one. And there's besides macro and being consistent, I think there's a bunch of others, but hopefully that gives you some color.
It's interesting because you were saying, is there a recession? Everyone says it's coming. I mean, isn't that what we're experiencing? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, isn't that, like, companies are literally not buying?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I think, listen, it's before tech, I spent 4 years in Wall Street. And so I like to think that my business acumen is very useful in these types of environments, because I can talk to people about the markets and what's going on and how they're thinking about tougher times. People don't want to use the R word. The R word, anytime it's brought up, it'll just crash the market. Right. So it's almost like, you don't want to address the problem, but you're right. This is a very different conversation, but, metrics are there or not there. And some people have their own perspective and their different perspective. As I mentioned, I think I agree with David Sachs that does say that there's a software recession. It's because people aren't buying anymore. So you have a point. I think I agree with you, but some people just don't want to admit it.
Let me ask you, there's a lot of conversation out there around specific motions, tactics, strategies, that sort of stuff, right? What would you say are and I know this is a big question, but if you had to kind of think about a couple tactics that you would say, listen, as a salesperson right now in 2023, as a marketing team, this is how you have to support sales. Like, you have to do these things. So maybe it's more of a go-to-market approach. Anything that you think you just have to do, like does every salesperson have to launch a social selling practice on LinkedIn? I suppose it depends on what you're selling, but within B2B software, let's say, anything that you have to do that maybe you could have not done in the past, maybe you just fielded inbound and did email, and phone outbound, but now you have to do this stuff?
Yeah. Listen, this is a great question. It's a huge one, as you mentioned. I think I'll try to answer it in the more general capacity because every product and team should have their own unique approach. So I don't think there's a one size fits all. But what I do think that is a common trend across the board is that the more human teams are the ones that are winning. Let me explain. Right now, there's one thing that you mentioned earlier, which I kept thinking about how we could talk about it, which
I
is
love that, by the way. The more human teams.
Right. And it's because there's so much AI, there's so much like automation, and there's so much, when you talk about commodity products, there's, I don't know how many hundreds, if not like, a couple thousand of like email prospecting tools that can just allow you to build a sequence, hit play, and just like fire away. Right. So I think that the time from where you and I grew up selling was more about like, how do you personalize something and how do you, kind of really think about what is Jorge, worried about, or what can I find out about Jorge that not everyone knows about that can actually catch his attention and want to do business with me. And that's where I think a lot of people aren't, kind of spending time because they will seek for a plug and play solution that will, just automate their sequence, have 1,000 touches within a week. And then they expect to get the results. Now, what I think is also a problem is the fact that we have, and probably like the younger generation has a instant gratification mentality where they expect that the same way I can pick up my phone and order food or ask for a car or, get likes and dopamine hits. That's not how sales works. Sales is a process and it takes you a little bit more work and time for you to get some results. So what I'm starting to see is that the teams that are actually spending the time being authentic and human are actually beating those automated, kind of solutions. And authenticity, is more about telling your story, right? And because at the end of the day, you want to transact with a human. So I think the reason you and I, initially connected and how we can like be human and talk about the things that we were going through in the middle of the pandemic and all those situations probably drove us closer and made us want to do business with each other, which is probably one of the reasons why I'm still here talking to you in your podcast, right? So in that same level of capacity, imagine if like I were to sell you something, I come clean and, show you my cards. I like to read, play guitar, from Puerto Rico, live in Miami, that kind of stuff. If people find that out and find that authenticity, they're like, I want to do business with Javier, and I think those are the teams that are winning. When you talk about, everyone having their social profiles and sort of, LinkedIn and all these things, I'm a big believer in LinkedIn. I use it a lot, and I think you know this. But for me, it's not. It's too many people trying to replicate each other's playbook and try to sound like everybody else, and that doesn't work. And there's a lot of that, and it's getting a lot noisier. And I think the only way for you to find differentiation is through authenticity. Because I don't want to do business with any of the LinkedIn heroes that all tell everyone that they hit their quotas when they're actually about to get fired, right? Or people that talk about making $1 million where actually they didn't make $1 million and they just want, kind of the impressions and the attention. And so I think that, again, the teams that are doing the best, I shared something about this week. There's a company that I work with, a client that is doing actually video prospecting. And the way that works, Jorge, is that you add someone, you don't send them a message, because every time you send someone a connection request with a message, somebody feels that they're being sold to. So they're going to probably decline your message, right? Now, once that person accepts, you have to wait a day or two. The reason also you have to wait is because you're doing the counter of what the bots do. The bots add you, and the minute that they add you, they send you a message. And so if you wait, which is sort of like a dating strategy, it's like as human as possible. You go out with a girl, you don't text her, right away. You probably wait a day or two, build some suspense, and those things, kind of work out. And then you send them a message, and it's tough to scale because you have to do it with your phone. but you send them a message where you say like, hey, Jorge, this is Javier. I love your profile. I see that you're building, kind of a product. Would love to, kind of find time to talk to you about what we're doing over here at Cuota, et cetera. And that shows your authenticity. It shows the person like who you are, and it's a better representation of you. And the person can actually decide based off that interaction and seeing you live, how they want to, kind of work with you and if they want to work with you. And email doesn't do that.
Yeah. Are you saying to use the voice message or like the video functionality?
Video. So and that's why I'm saying it's tough to scale, because you actually have to go into your phone on LinkedIn and say like, here's a video of my face, and like stand up like that, and there's some intricacies. You have to smile because that's going to be the first frame that's going to show up when somebody opens up kind of their inbox. But it sort of allows you to stand apart. And obviously the message, how you deliver it, and the things that you say in whatever order is very important. And there's frameworks that you and I have probably known for many years, like ADA, right? So there's the attention grabber, then there's like the interest section, then there's a desire, and then ultimately there's a call to action, right? So there's simple practices that we've used through email, but now we're applying it to ourselves because that's what gets people, to respond, but in your own personal way. So it's like, I want to do business with this guy. He prepared. He did some research on me. He looks nice, like trustworthy. He's, wearing a black shirt and talking to a microphone. That's different, or something along those lines, right? So I think that human, it's the human interaction and the human effort that's showing people that you've done your homework, but that also you're a normal guy like everybody else. And you're not disrespecting them by just wasting their time and putting them into another sequence is usually what I've seen work really well lately.
Awesome. I got to write these things down. It's interesting, if you think about just kind of how things change, right? Like we used to go door to door, right?
Yeah.
Like face to face. I know, I did that for a while.
Yep.
And then picked up the phone, and then next it was the email, because the internet. And I remember crushing it, Javi. I used to crush it at email prospecting back, like this was 2008, 2009 as an SDR, all the way, I think it was to 2010. I literally, this is my email.
Yeah.
And people thought, on my team that I was crazy, but I crushed it. I used to do I'd book 20 meetings a week. I mean, it was crazy.
Nice.
And it was inquiry in the subject line. And we were selling social online community software, right?
Okay.
Early days of that. And then my message was like, hi, Sally, good day. Would you be the person to chat with around social media initiatives? Cheers. That was it, right? And where I got that from, I know, right?
Simple, straightforward, but to the point too.
Yeah. And what's interesting is I got that from my door-to-door days where I would like knock on the door and be like, hi. I wouldn't launch into a pitch, right? Obviously, I'd be like, hey, would you be the person to speak to about, at that time I was selling like study guides and stuff like that for kids. So like, would you be the person to speak to about your kids' education here? And so I my whole idea was trying to just get them to engage in a conversation versus shut off and go slam the door, right?
Yeah.
And that worked for a long time. I mean, I used that for years, like that one-liner email, and it converted into God knows how many meetings.
Yep.
But it doesn't seem like that's effective anymore, right? Like even email and that the surface level stuff, people, I'll take a step back and say, I think that at that time people weren't getting emails like they are today.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So like maybe people would like, how would you even get someone's data? I remember we were using tools like the List out of I think Atlanta. So this was like Jigsaw, the early days, data.com.
Right.
So like, we were in the tech industry. We had these tools. So you were able to get people's information. But like nowadays, everyone
Mhm.
has that, right? So
That's the
like,
problem.
right?
Yeah. Everyone has access to the same information you have access to. So the only way that you can differentiate yourself is through like your message and the work that you put in.
Hmm.
I think the work you put in is something that is under discussed, right? Because if I spent, let's say I have 30 accounts that I want to get into, and for those 30 accounts, I spent 30 minutes to an hour on each one, and I can craft an individualized, like, personal message that actually brings up something relevant to have a conversation around. Those people are likely going to want to talk to you. But what most people will do is they'll go to a tool like Apollo. They'll search for the 30 people. They'll put them into a sequence. They'll write 5 emails if they're even decent at writing 5 emails. And they'll press play and wait.
Hmm.
And or like if you're smarter than that, you would go do that and then go on LinkedIn and kind of like try to find them through either channel. I think that what's happened is that 10 years ago, people didn't get prospected into as much. So you were, differentiating yourself because at that time, cold calling was sort of like the main channel, I'll call it.
Hmm.
And so now everyone's doing email. And as of, I would tell you, like maybe 2020, there was a big shift because everyone, like, I see the curve of like positive or let's say increasing email prospecting. But what happened with LinkedIn was like this,
Hmm.
right? So LinkedIn was a tool that, let's call it from like maybe 2015 through 2020 was not as busy.
Hmm.
So what you were seeing in email in '08, people are seeing in LinkedIn from 2015 through 2020.
Hmm.
But now when you add all the channels are busy, email, LinkedIn, phone, how do you differentiate yourself? Because there's a lot of noise. I mean, I'm sure as a founder for what you're building today, like you probably get all kinds of people trying to get into your inbox to sell you stuff. So now you're on the receiving end of it, which is like, wow, man, I can't believe people really send this out. I know I'm part of a
Yeah.
sequence. And what's hilarious is that I've gotten some templates that I used back in the day, which is the one where it looks like you forwarded an email from your VP of sales or from
Hmm.
your CEO that's saying like, hey, like Javier looks like super interesting. Like, can you get a call with him on the books? And it makes you feel important. And I responded to someone recently. I was like, hey, man, I appreciate the hustle, but I used this template in 2017. Please remove me from your list.
Hmm.
And I never got a response from them. But, what I'm saying is like what used to work, 5 years
Hmm.
ago doesn't work today.
Yeah.
And for people, there's this very basic quote that I always think about, which is, if you do the same thing twice and expect different results, that's insanity.
Hmm.
Albert Einstein wrote that, right? So a lot of people will do that. They're like, oh, my sequence didn't work. Let me send 150 more emails to see if this one works.
Hmm.
And so anyway, that's sort of the point there.
Yeah. So go back to being human, go back to actually doing like the manual work.
Mm-hmm.
And I know we were talking about AI, you're familiar with the product, and
Yeah.
we started off building workflows and, really trying to figure out the way that we can solve these pains that we discovered. And
Yep.
we just jumped into AI. We
Yep.
wanted to first, figure out how to solve things and then layer AI to add a multiplying
Yep.
or multiplier effect, right?
Right.
And it sounds like to me that's really where maybe the industry sort of went wrong a bit, right? Where we started to empowered, I don't want to say lazy, but I'm just going to say lazy salespeople to just do what you said with Apollo, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just
Mm-hmm.
drop in things. So it wasn't like adding really a multiplier effect
Mm-hmm.
upon the manual work, upon the best practices,
Right.
upon the human stuff. It was starting from automation and just becoming generic, right?
Right.
And so I think maybe that's where, as we refine the just in general AI and automation,
Mm-hmm.
where we can really improve.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so too. I think, and speaking of something you haven't asked me, but I'll voluntarily talk about it. But the way I wish AI works is that it can automate the things that can be repetitive, but
Mm,
we insert our human capacity into the sales process, and that's how we win.
mm,
Because if I can leverage my personality, work or research that I've done, business acumen, and try to like transact with someone, and focus on that, I'll be extremely good.
mm,
Because I'm essentially taking what for me I call my 1% skill is that human, kind of relationship interaction, and everything else gets automated. I don't have to do any type of context switching through selling.
mm.
So I'm just focused on one thing and I let AI do the rest.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, let's talk a little bit about your new product, right? Which I'm really excited about. Again, congratulations
Thank
building
you, man.
building
Thank
this
you.
product. Let's dive in. Like, what inspired you to build the Quota product?
So it's this exact conversation. Like I was telling you, um, I was thinking about the product, right? Because what I think people are good at, right? It's being human.
Mm,
And what I don't think that they're extremely good at is at not being that, and doing the context switching in a very busy environment. And so let me give you an example. When I was at Zenefits, I started as an individual contributor, and I sold a product that nobody else sold. It was a stock options tool to manage employee, stock options within a company. And so because of my finance background, I was the only one that was able to talk to a, CFO about the cap table and options and all these types of great things. And dude, I was doing anywhere between like 10 to 12 demos a day. I didn't have time for anything, Jorge. Like it was like demo next, demo next, demo next. And I figured out at that point in time how to build myself a system. And part of the things what I did at night was I'm going to go and prepare and write a list of all the people that I'm going to talk to. I'm going to research each one, and I'm going to try to figure out a way how do I become relatable to them. So, for example, if I'm talking to you, how is Jorge, relatable to Javier? Both Latinos living in Miami, starting in tech, play guitar. Those are icebreakers, and those are things that can get me closer to you. And then the rest of the stuff, you can simply do. But I want to
mm,
leave an impression on you. I want you to remember me, and I want you to say, like, man, that guy's cool. Like, I want to do business with him, and I appreciate him.
mm,
Right. Because also part of what I would research would be, maybe what could you be doing, or what could I know about your business that you don't have to tell me, because I can Google. And so everything that I'm describing is called a pre-call research.
mm,
And a lot of people don't do that. Bringing it back to your question from earlier, a lot of early stage sales teams do not prepare for calls. They're
mm,
professional wingmen, like wingers, because they're not wingmen even. And so what they do is they show up to a call and they ask. Sometimes I've seen sales reps ask, like, how did you find out about us? It's like, listen, man, it's not about you. It's about them. You should
mm,
like say like, hey, we're going to, walk you through our product. But before we walk you through our product, let me ask you a couple questions. And so, they didn't come prepared.
mm,
So what I'm trying to do is to elevate the human component in the sales process, is to build a tool that is using AI to gather all the different data sources where people usually will look up information ahead of a call,
mm,
and put that into your calendar. So it's a Chrome extension that when you go into your calendar, you say, Jorge has, lived in Miami, worked in tech, plays guitar. All of these are things that make you and I relatable. So I come better prepared to the call. And it's very shown that like my success in that call, or my win rate, is going to be a lot higher if I prepare and put some time into the call. And so the tool is essentially, synthesizing all this data, putting it into your calendar, and also giving you insights on like relatability and how you guys can like, kind of become relatable, and get a better outcome for that particular conversation.
awesome. Javi, I can't wait to use it. I know I signed up because that's what had happened. I remember seeing you post it, and I was like,
Yeah.
I clicked on. I was like, I've seen attempts at it over the years. I remember there was an app called Charlie app or something a long time ago,
Yeah.
and the way you've done it, like just at least from the screenshots, I'm really looking forward to using it. So, please keep me updated.
I will, man. I will. I think I listen. It's really great, and I think unfortunately for timing for the guys like Charlie or whatnot, there wasn't these large language models that were developed. Where also one of the big things that I've tried to do after my sales leadership career is how do I replicate myself or productize myself.
Mm,
And so you can train a large language model to be very sophisticated in sales. And so it will tell you or give you insights, not just based off the data, but based off like, sophisticated sales playbooks that will take, a young account executive and give them tools or insights that they may or may not think about.
mm.
So it's again, it's almost doing the job for you. And if you leverage it enough and bring your human side to the conversation, like I think it's going to be incredible and do really good things for like sales conversations.
Awesome. Well, Javi, thank you so much for being on the show. If folks want to maybe sign up to the wait list, or maybe learn more about Quota and the other services you provide, what are some good URLs or handles or social networks to reach you?
Yeah, I mean, the best way to get in touch with me directly is on LinkedIn, Javier Rami rez Lugo. You can ask me anything through there. For anyone that's interested in the product, it's still in the works. It's a landing page, but quota.ai. We'd love to have you sign up for the waitlist because obviously you'll be the first ones that we'll call, like we'll call Jorge to give him a first demo and access. And Twitter, I'm Javi B2B. And any other channel, I'm Javi B2B as well. So feel free to reach out. I'm pretty approachable. Love to talk about sales to anyone.
Awesome. Well, brother, hope to see you soon. We got to get together with Gaetano and
I
have
know.
some dinner soon.
I know. Thank you. Thank you for having me, Jorge. This is awesome.
Absolutely. Have a great day.
All right, man. Take care.